The Self-Perception of African Americans in Rap Music by Jasmine. You will have 15 minutes to talk. There'll be a 5-minute Q&A afterwards.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, so again, my name's Jasmine. The name of my presentation is Politics as Usual, Self-Portrayal, Self-Perception of African Americans in Rap Music. And so that's the song Politics as Usual, by the way. Jay-Z, it's part of my singing. So the backstory behind this is that I was taking a political communications class in the fall. And in the class, we read a study released in 2005 by Michael Dixon. And in the study, what he did was he looked at the way that audiences in LA were perceiving news stories about ethnic minorities. So what he did was he took a sample size and he went and he had this massive just collection of news stories from LA local media, and he compared and he looked at the way that the dominant culture, so white Americans, were perceiving ethnic minorities. And what he found was that overwhelmingly, the media overwhelmingly presents blacks in situations of violence and poverty. And his study is something that's very, very well researched and well founded in communications research and scholarship. So the second thing that he found was that this overrepresentation creates a dominant media narrative where blacks exist within a predetermined and finite number of frames. And because of that, what we have is that these frames increase perceptions of hostility and also negative discriminatory bias towards African Americans, particularly African American males. Now, what I found really, really interesting about this was that my class was very, very surprised by these findings. Now, maybe just me, as the only African American in the room, nothing about this surprised me at all. Very used to this narrative, very used to this framework. But it surprised me that everyone else was so incredibly shocked by these findings. Now, the thing that I found interesting was that this only focused on the perceptions of white Americans. And so I wanted to know, that similar to your research, completely excluded the African American perspective. And so that's what I was looking for when I started this research. So a question that I get a lot when I talk to people about this is why rap music? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the experts tell you. So this is a trailer for a documentary that just explains this idea of it.
It didn't start out as a popular culture movement. It didn't even have pop culture ambitions.
We're not supposed to be thinking like this. We're not supposed to be talking like this.
We created something from nothing.
We wanted to hit everybody across the head with a sledgehammer, like, listen to what we're doing out here.
There has to be a method for the madness.
I don't like looking at you. Fix your pants, fix your hat. What are you doing invading my home? Why are my kids liking your music? What's going on?
Back in the days, we used to call it the dozens. Slaves would start saying, your head's bigger than your neck, and that makes you a lollipop. Ah!
It's a folk art, it's folk music.
We took the record player and turned it into an instrument.
Here's this world, that you may not know about. And the people who lived in that world are from the other side of the tracks. Gave them a voice.
Hip-hop didn't invent anything. Hip-hop reinvented everything.
Okay, so what I really, really love about that is in that clip, you heard Common talk about rap music as folk music. So one of the reasons that I chose rap music as my sample is because, or as the way to measure the self-portrayal of African Americans, or how blacks perceive themselves, is because music is one of the authentic outgrowths of the African American experience. And what that means is that there are very, very well-researched roots that have music in the African American community as a narrative for the experiences. And this is just rap music as the newest articulation of this form. And so it's for a new generation. So before there was rap, there was disco. Before there was disco, there was jazz. And before there was jazz, there's like rhythm and blues. Before that, there's the blues. And before that, you have gospel music and the old Negro slave spirituals and hymnals. So you have a very, very rich foundation in music. Also, rap itself is poetry. And so it's very, very heavily based in the lyrics. That's where the lifeblood of this is. And so I really, really wanted to focus on this idea of a narrative because my research sits right in the nexus between communications and political science and where they meet. And so this idea of narratives, this idea of frames and priming, this is a very, very communications-based theory, but it has very real-world applications for political science, and those implications really do affect the way that we perceive other groups. So what I wanted to do was to work outside of the dominant cultural framework, and rap music does that beautifully. One of the things that we really, really like about rap is that it's transgressive. It doesn't necessarily fit very easily into the dominant theme, particularly when you're talking about media perceptions in the mainstream media. So, I had two hypotheses going into this, and the first one was that the concept of rap lyrics will project a narrative, the African American experience in the inner cities. And that was actually something that I had to go and prove and kind of fight for in my opinion. The second one is the self-perception in rap music will reflect and reinforce the dominant cultural narrative of African Americans as seen in mainstream broadcast news sources. So what that means is that those 3 points I made earlier about there being a very heavily emphasis in frames of violence and crime, about those, about violence and crime, about those stories being finite and definite, about African Americans existing in very few frames outside of those, and also about those frames reinforcing and propping up negative stereotypes. That's what I was looking for in this, and I said that rap music was going to prop up and kind of fortify those claims. So then my research sample. What I did was I used Atlas TI software to go and I ran coding. So it was qualitative samples. I had 365 lines of code, so lyrics, from these 3 different albums: Reasonable Doubt by Jay-Z, Illmatic by Nas, and then Ready to Die by Notorious B.I.G. So the reason that I picked these albums, one, because these are seminal records in the rap genre. You cannot call yourself a rap fan if you have not listened to these albums. They're huge. They represent turning points in the genre, and so they're very, very, very good places to start. They also come from one geographic location, which geography is very important in rap music because the style changes depending on where you're at. And so they come from different boroughs, but all from New York City. And then you also have these albums as being major commercial successes. And so the reason that I have that is because what this does is it kind of establishes that these albums have resonated with a very large segment of the population. Alright, so what I did was I went in and I created 6 different codes. And it was very, very, very heavily based in the crime aspect because that is what I was comparing from the mainstream media sources. And so I just kind of want to go through and explain the codes a little bit because I made a few of them up. So crime, anything that feature instances of assault, robbery, weapons, or murder. Drugs, any references implied or explicit to illicit narcotics. Life in the Hood was any lyric that talked about the dominant social norms in New York's inner city, kind of like getting at the culture of what it's like to live in the inner city. I had the mentality as being, I'm going to read this one because this is probably the hardest one to understand. So lyrics that fell under mentality fell under this code because they denoted a certain amount of acceptance of a high level of poverty, unemployment, violence, and other social problems. Lyrical content under this code is often used as an explanation for illegal activity and violence, and it's always accompanied by a feeling of resignation or vulnerability. And that's going to be an important point. And then political demands, anything that referenced overt political statements, and I mark those by like a reference to an institution, so education system, the police. The hustle, this is meant to personify any poverty. Poverty was made any reference to a lack of money or a situation that occurred because of a lack of money. And then the hustle was the mentality that glorifies making money. So anything you can do, and this also, the important part about that is that the hustle, the idea behind this, is that to be able to get out of this cycle of poverty, you have to be successful. And the only way to be successful, success is defined as making money. And that is also going to be important once we get to the results section. So then after I went through and I coded the sample, just so you guys know, of the 3,600 things that I went and I looked at, maybe about 751 made it into this study. So it's roughly 21%. So this was not a very representative thing, because the thing that I was measuring was the crime context, and so a lot of other things got kind of left out of this research. But you can see that crime was the highest code, and it represented about 32% of the lyrics. And then the second highest code is going to be the hustle, followed very closely by the mentality. So the hustle was at about 18% of the lyrics coded, and then the mentality was at about 16% of the lyrics. The reason that this is important, and these are pretty much the only ones that I'm going to talk about, the reason that this is important is because the prevalence of crime, which, by the way, was taken almost entirely from Notorious B.I.G., Ready to Die, as you can tell by the title, it accounted for about 64% of all the lyrics in the crime code. So very, very heavily swayed on that end. But the reason for this is because it does prop up that dominant media perception of African Americans being framed in instances of crime and assault, gun possession, very, very illegal activity. Now, the key difference, and this was the result of my study, was that the difference here is going to be in the frame and in the way that it was talked about. So again, this is this communications aspect coming in. So in the mainstream media narrative, what you have is that there is something inherent about African Americans that makes them more prone to instances of violence and crime. What you have in the rap music is you have this frame that suggests that because of the hustle, this idea that to be successful, to get out of the hood, to get out of poverty, you have to make money. And because of the mentality that accompanies that, which is that there is no other way, there's a very overt sentiment of vulnerability and also of resignation. So those two codes suggest a much more nuanced finding, which is that the reason that instances of crime are so prevalent is because people think that there's no other way out. So it's a cycle that feeds into itself that is indeed very, very vicious, because you have this glorification of making money. You have this glorification of people doing there's a line in Give Me the Loot on Ready to Die, which is Biggie's album, where he says, I've been robbing motherfuckers since the slave ships with the same clip and the same 4-5. And when he goes on and talking, it's a conversation that's going back and forth between himself and another rapper. And what you get from this exchange, this interchange, is that we're robbing, at the beginning of this, actually, I should note, is that you hear a baby in the background crying, and then you hear a domestic dispute, there's a struggle there, and you hear a door slam, and then they're going and they're gonna go rob somebody, and the entire idea is give me the loot. And so it's how do I feed this kid if I don't have a job? It's this idea the only way to do it is through crime. And it's a very, very, very angry sentiment, but to some degree it is what it is, and that's really the takeaway that you get from rap music. And so what you have when you hold up this dominant cultural narrative that you get from the mainstream media, and then the other one that you get from the rap music, are two ideas that are strange bedfellows, but are also very, very different from each other. So yes, crime is a problem in African American communities, particularly in the inner city, specifically in New York City, but also that the reasons for that are different. And the reason that that's important for real-world application is because if the reasons are different, then the solutions are also different, right? And I think that's another place for further research to kind of extend into.